For a breakout session on the meetings and events industry, please welcome EventMB Editor-in-Chief Julius Solaris.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Julius Solaris, and I am the editor of EventMB. EventMB is part of Skift, and we cover news and research for what pertains to the meetings and events industry. Specifically, we've been quite close to the topic of coronavirus and the impact it has had on events since the very beginning, since February 2020. We've been following and covering and trying to give clarity on what is the impact of coronavirus, what is the reflection for the industry, how soon we can expect to go back, and what that sort of going back to business looks like. Specifically, being Italian, I've been very close to monitoring what has happened in Europe, and we'll present to you today some analysis that we've done that pertains specifically to Europe, as well as a global perspective of what can you expect. So I guess if you're here today, what we're trying to answer are questions in the likes of what is the timeline, what is everybody else doing in the event industry, when do we expect to go back, and what are the measures you need to put in place to run safe meetings. Also, we will try to give you a perspective of what will happen going forward. So once sort of the crisis goes away, what are we left with? What will meetings look like in the longer perspective, longer term, sort of beyond 2021. I guess to frame it for you, it's important to note what I mean by what. So short term, I would say, is the next 6 months. Longer term is Q1 2021 onwards, which is very close to crystal balling at this stage with how things are changing every day and the pace at which things are changing, as well as the unpredictability of the virus. You know, we've seen a lot of scenarios changing very quickly. We'll try to give you all the information that you need to make educated decisions and to answer your questions live right after my talk. There's going to be Dylan Monarchio, my deputy editor, who will be able to take any questions you may have live right after this session ends. So let's start with what happened. Okay, and what happened is so depicted in this slide that I'm sharing right now. This is part of a survey that we just run in June 2020, global survey that tells you pretty much how event planners reacted to the coronavirus crisis. Specifically, 36% canceled it, 32 postponed their major event, 32 pivoted to virtual. Obviously, virtual events have become an integral part of the new normal as such, but by the same token, we have to realize that, especially that 32% I'm looking at right now that postponed it, that is becoming also potential cancellation or another virtual event. A lot of people in March, February did postpone it to July, August, and we're seeing a lot of those events being canceled or pivoted to virtual right now. So that 32% will have to be absorbed in the next two categories. The second element is an analysis that the CEIR Institute performed, where they looked at the cancellation levels and a global outlook for the exhibition industry specifically, which has been probably the most impacted. Also for a structural incapability to pivot to virtual. You know, trade shows are way more complex in the dynamics of buyer and seller, not necessarily as easy to replicate online as it is for other types of business events like conferences and the likes. So the outlook for 2020 is 15%. We've seen 75% cancellations from this research coming up. Looking at what the short term looks like and what is a projection of the next 6 months. what are different countries doing, how event planners plan to go back to work, and what that does look like. First of all, we run an event with around 2,500 attendees live at the beginning of the crisis in March. And we asked them when are they planning to go back to events. We had 2,000 people participating in this live poll. And as you can tell, the prominent response back then was October, December, so Q4 2020, with a very short sort of perspective on Q3, 2021 being the second most popular option. To cross-reference that, we run another survey once again in June, so 4 months after, 3 months actually and a half after our initial survey, and things have slightly changed. You see there's an increase in those looking at Q3 potential to go back to events, but you know, the widest majority is definitely Q4, 75%, looking at definitely the end of the year at least. Depends also on what type of event. We question ourselves on EventMB, what does going back to events look like, especially for corporate events. And obviously there's a connection with corporate travel there, with travel in Europe specifically being opened up. We have a much more positive outlook for people attending conferences, but will companies commit to send people for conferences, which is sometimes seen as non-essential, especially with virtual events being all the rage? That's a question that looms there. This is probably the most popular post we've done in the crisis, which it's pinned on eventmb.com, and you can have a look at it. We recently updated it with the spike in hospitalizations in the US specifically. We sort of split it in terms of likelihood of comeback. We still have a somewhat likely Q4 data confirms that. Q1 2021, probably even more so. Risk of hosting your event, I would say that July, September is still very risky. It's still quite risky. If you're looking at that time frame, there is a lot of elements that are unclear. There are no necessarily uniform approaches from different states and countries. So I would warn you to consider that. There's still a lot of volatility in terms of how the virus is behaving, and you know, measures. Just news of today that Germany is putting again 500,000 people under lockdown, and at time of recording, obviously things may change very fast. So you're taking a lot of risk especially if you're planning events for corporate audiences. To further reflect what we discussed earlier, there's a completely different outlook there in terms of how different countries are going back to events. And this is like just a snapshot that, you know, is the most updated one, but is not relevant anymore as of today. So we have to update it constantly, and you can check a post on EventMB that has the latest numbers in terms of different countries. We have the top 25 most impacted countries from COVID-19 and how are they reopening events. And it's interesting to note how completely different these are the capacities in terms of attendees are. I'm specifically shocked by looking at Spain, France, and Italy. That's a case in point that we made on an article on EventMB, talking on how Spain is planning to go back with no limitation in June. Italy is going back end of June, depending on the region, different regulations. France is going back in September 1st. So no plan whatsoever, no logic whatsoever behind how different countries are reacting to reopening events, different timelines, different sizes. And sometimes we're just talking a few miles, few kilometers away, So there's still a lot of confusion when it gets to how governments understand business events and planned events as opposed to mass gatherings as such. And also, I guess, one interesting information to keep an eye on is the result of the recent protests that we've witnessed around the world. So yeah, definitely a lot of focus on that. Interesting news that is coming from Italy, so very relevant for Europe right now, is being pushed by a lot of clinical doctors in Italy, talking about how the viral load of COVID-19 is changing from March to May 2020. Specifically, Bassetti, a doctor based in Genoa in Italy, is advocating together with the head of the ICU at San Raffaele in Milano. They're advocating how essentially ICU units are empty and people are not being hospitalized in Italy anymore. They say this may be due to a change in the virus. A lot of people are saying this is due only to the effect of the lockdown. So still a lot of confusion in terms of what is happening there, but maybe some positive hints, positive news of how the impact of the virus in Europe specifically. This is the classification of the CDC that was released a couple of weeks ago, very late, together with the WHO, and essentially not giving any more clarity than what we discussed. If you want low risk right now, the only way is virtual events. When you want to get into in-person live events, there's going to be a wealth of measures that you have to take into account. There are components in terms of capacity you have to be aware of. And in general, you have to tend to be aware of how the triage works and how to take care of people that may fall sick during the event, during your event. So that increases the pressure in terms of operation. Interesting what is happening here with super spreader events. This is a graphic that has been kind of very popular, and we've covered on EventMB as well, on how the virus spreads indoors. So specifically, the beginning of the spread is being largely driven by indoor gatherings where people talk loud. So that's kind of the highest risk right now. Once again, there's a completely different response to this risk in terms of different countries. Not everybody seems to follow this. So yeah, what can we say is safe right now? We spoke to an epidemiologist here in Las Vegas, Brian Labus, Dr. Brian Labus from UNLV. He mentioned that these are kind of the direction, going local where the outbreak is controlled, where there are not a lot of cases and hospitalization specifically, more than cases that are tied to testing. Hospitalizations is a much better metric to keep an eye on. Smaller meetings, more controlled, less time together in the same room. So a lot of circulation in the venue, single day rather than multi-day, as you can incur in people getting sick throughout the event. What do meetings look like? Obviously, thermal scanning is becoming the norm in a lot of meetings. Does it work? We don't know, to be honest. We don't know yet if it works properly, especially because, yes, it can tell you those that are currently sick, but it doesn't help to screen for those that are asymptomatic, pre-symptomatic, that don't have a fever, but may well spread the virus. Okay, so thermal scanning is kind of becoming a must-have, at least to screen a portion of the audience, but it doesn't really help to secure 100% your event. 75% fewer transmission with masks. I know there's different opinion about masks, but some states as well as some countries are enforcing masks as a way to protect others, specifically from us, more than us from others. So having masks at events would be a top recommendation if you're looking at planning events. Distancing, in this case, we call it social. We prefer to call it probably physical distancing. 2 meters, 6 feet apart. So reworking your layout for events is increasingly crucial. Also, we're seeing, let's talk about long-term and how things are changing in the wider sort of longer perspective. So these are just some elements of events, but how will event look like once we go back, okay? So this is a new hierarchy of needs that we put together, and it kind of tells you a story of how events used to be. We used to go to events to listen to a keynote, then to network, and then probably to be entertained. I would say that networking will be the number one reason why we would attend events in 2021. The desire to have meaningful connections after the dryness of virtual events. We want to meet new people, talk to people, and also be entertained, which is something that we're lacking right now. And therefore, content. Will we travel to listen to a keynote? Probably virtual events have taught us that we wouldn't be as prone to travel just for the sake of listening to someone. We can do it from the comfort of our room. Everybody tends to agree that the virtual revolution is one to stay, and most live events will have a virtual component, becoming de facto hybrid events. How you manage and handle that hybrid part is going to be increasingly important, especially in the proximity of Q4 2020, Q1 2021, as hybrid, as a lot of people won't be able to attend. You will have to run events at lower capacity. Therefore, including those virtual audiences will be paramount and key. One of the items that we talked about on the blog was revenge attending, and you know, the feeling that a lot of people will feel the need to connect in person. And as we see in casinos bouncing back here in Vegas on the leisure side, we may expect something like that once there's the go-ahead for meetings and events to actually expect a lot of demand. And if you're planning to go back in 2021, for sure, look into booking your venues very quickly, because we anticipate pretty busy Q2, Q3 next year. We're also seeing a lot of new roles popping up in the industry for those that have been furloughed or laid off. These are some of the roles that we're seeing rising. The event technologist, virtual event coordinator, virtual event tech support, so also MCs and moderators. We see a lot of those popping up. So changing roles as well within the industry. We also talked about a case study in one of our events where Salesforce actually pivoted to virtual. It was one of the first events to pivot to virtual, and where they used to have a 15,000 live attendance, they're now having an 80,000 virtual attendance. Therefore, do not discount virtual going forward. Do invest in hybrid as the way to go for your future events. And yeah, hopefully we can all go back to very safe meetings and events in 2021, hopefully sooner than that. It's been a tough time, obviously, for the industry that had to reinvent themselves in the space of a few months. If you have any questions about anything that I presented today, it would be my pleasure to take them on. If you have questions right now, there's going to be Dylan Monarchio, my deputy editor, to actually answer some of those. If you have more questions specific to what I just presented, get in touch. Add to Julius everywhere, jds@skift.com, Julius Solaris on LinkedIn. It's been a pleasure to present to you. I wish you a great rest of Skift Forum Europe, and I wish to see you in person soon. Thank you.